Good evening. I think most of you are very familiar with the work of Peter and his partner Julia Bolles. Maybe if somebody could switch off these phones, I would really appreciate it. They were both students here at the AA, Peter having studied in Australia before coming to the AA, and Julia in Germany. When they had the opportunity to do their first building in Munster, I think it was very much a demonstration of some of their preoccupations with particular architectural objects, with questions of figuration, and I think because of the circumstances of Munster, very much a library building that understood the question of context and dealt with the topic of contextualism. Since the completion of that building, and in sort of hearing Peter here over the last couple of years, it seems that some of his interests have shifted towards this area of Eurolandschaft and the general field of operations in the context of Europe, where really the issue of boundaries, specific conditions of the traditional city are already in some way transformed into a situation where fields and fields of relations and nodes become more significant in a sense than the understanding of the traditional urban fabric. And in a way, as a kind of project of probably partial resistance to the condition of the virtualities of these circumstances, I think, if I understand it correctly, Peter has proposed in some of his recent writing or has called for, in a sense, an architecture which addresses the question of mass and also the haptic qualities of material surface as something that should really be thought of as constructing now new nodes in the case of the European Eurolandschaft. Tonight, Peter is giving a talk which is entitled "Not to Underestimate Commodity," understood the word commodity understood in the ancient sense of commoditas. Would you welcome Peter Wilson?
Thank you, Moisen. I hardly need to say anything now after such a complete introduction. Maybe just a short introduction. I read recently a number of, or an article by William Curtis, who said a lot of things I would like to have been able to say. One of them, he said, would possibly disqualifies my lecture tonight. He said one should listen to the stated intentions of the architect with the same skepticism that a psychoanalyst reserves for the patient's explanation of his own behavior. I think what architects say and what architects build are quite often different. My talk tonight is not so much about what architects say. I think my last lecture at the AA was called Mass in the Age of Media. I want simply today maybe just to do a simple cross-section through projects in our office. Simply maybe to show successful projects, project or competition entries which didn't succeed, simply to just to show where we are now. I won't be showing sort of the old favorites. I think the curved office building in Münster has been shown quite completely here at the AA. So I think lots of what I'll be showing will be new works not yet seen here. I think it was also from the William Curtis article. There's a very clear statement of saying architecture is the boundary between the material and the immaterial. I find this a very, very clear statement. I think the immaterial involves virtual space, it involves concept, it involves spirituality perhaps, and the material is the mass, the material, the stuff of architecture. And I think obviously the two relate, obviously one does not exist without the other. But I think for me the role of the architect is this materializing of less concrete subjects. Just a small sort of visual reiteration of that statement. You all know, I'm sure, the Uccello chalice, the discovery of perspective. With the discovery of a new visual system, the objects become, for some time, a few hundred years in this case, transparent. What Uccello draws is not the material of the vase, but he's actually drawing the visual system. You all recognize it today because it's a wire frame. Wireframes are a visual system, but they are not the subject of a work of architecture. They're simply the medium. On the other side, of course, almost the same form, but classical architecture very much about mass. A recent encounter of the Architecture Bureau Boris Wilson and the Dalai Lama. Maybe the same subject as the last two slides. We were recently asked to do a small commemorative stone for the visit by the Dalai Lama. We started sketching in the computer. We had to put a particular text on, sort of saying, sort of, His Honor, the Dalai Lama was here on this date, etc., etc. There's simply this merging of text, one sort of information, of matter, the stone, the carrier. One tests it first in an immaterial way. We did lots of computer modelings of various stone shapes. Actually, how to get the letters on the stone was the question. Very simple, dumb question. Simply, do we mold them or put them inside the mold or add them later? Not a particularly major work of architecture, but the Dalai Lama seemed to like it. I think he's saying it looks like Boris Wilson. I hope he's saying that. One of those is upside down, but it doesn't matter. Again, this is some other images about this sort of spaces which are virtual, or this collision between virtuality and physicality. This incredible photograph of the space, the ephemeral space made by a helicopter landing. And a picture I took myself from a helicopter flying over our library in Münster. This is our library in Münster, and that is our office. Just as a reference, luckily Moisen mentioned it, the library in Münster, our first major public building. It's now been open 5 years. For us, it's become a datum, a sort of measuring point of what a building should do. I think this is where the subject of the lecture, commodities of usefulness, comes in. The library has been published in architectural journals. It also is used by 4,000 people every day, and I think there's a sort of a measure there of a building's success that one really gets that feedback on as an architect. We once asked the editor of Bauwelt in Germany why he doesn't publish reports on buildings 5 years after they opened. He said he couldn't because he'd have to criticize them very, very strictly, and he'd lose his readership. So architects don't want their work criticized. Nevertheless, I think use is and basically one is paid to do the building to be used. So whatever concepts one puts in, one also has to not forget usefulness. Our library is now performing almost invisibly. People no longer talk about it as that new building. They assume it was always there. I hope most of you know it. I don't want to explain too much detail. As Moisen said, historic city, even though reconstructed after the Second World War. The building cut in half to one reason to break the scale down into smaller objects, the scale one finds in the historic city. Another reason to actually fold together public and internal space. One can walk still within public space. One can stand in the middle of the library. When one stands here on this street, one can look through windows at the entire sort of ground plane of the library. There one stands at that level down there and looks through here. I think very basic technical things about building. Building is cut, we have to close the cut. So we do what Moisen referred to as figuration. We make the closing like a wrapping, a skin. Laminated timber beams on the outside, copper, which after 5 years is finally starting to turn green. I think in probably about 2005 this building will be finished when the copper is finally green. We also made a choice there in building the building to not pre-patinate the copper. So the building wasn't 100% finished on opening day. I think buildings have a long life. They're not instantaneous. They actually grow into their context. They grow into people's memory. And our idea in leaving the copper, this was actually a very ugly brown color, is that the building, as it starts to age, as it really starts to fit its site, it actually also grows. It grows another color, sort of a bright, this really fresh copper color. So it looks like there's little enough pollution in Münster that the green will come. To jump from the library to a project which has now started on site. It started 1 month ago on site. In the intervening 10 years since we won the Munster Library competition, actually more, we won it in 1987, we've done smaller buildings, offices, private commissions, almost no other public buildings. This is partly to do with our situation in Germany. As soon as the library was finished, the two Germanys united. All the money went to the east and there's no money left for public commissions. The situation is quite the opposite in Holland at the moment. In Holland, the Dutch economy is booming. The Dutch government has decreed that 1 million houses should be built in the next 5 years. Each city is competing with public buildings, with architecture as a representation of the city. I think this is one of the most healthy examples one could find anywhere for a truly public role of architecture. We were lucky enough 2 years ago now, just over 2 years ago, to win the competition for this site. This is not actually this building that you see here. This is the Kop van Zout in Rotterdam. Ben van Berkel's bridge here. I don't think Ben will be here. And our quay landscaping, or landscaping of the quay on the water's edge. We also have been involved with the city planning office in the coordinating of traffic and sort of the urban spaces here. Also in tidying up a master plan from Norman Foster, which was way out of date and didn't meet the latest planning stage. Also, part of that is coordinating the street spaces here. This tower is now being built by Renzo Piano. We, as part of this urban planning, developed the concept of the office district ending with a very sharp border, of these two existing buildings getting a third companion, these three being defined as actors on a stage, each of them quite individual objects, each with quite different architectures. Luckily, the city of Rotterdam came up with a very animate program, a theatre, or it's in fact an existing theatre moving to a much bigger building, the new Luxor Theatre. A theatre for opera and for musicals for 1,500 audience. They decided to that this was the right site to bring public life to this square, to the new harbour district. Very spectacular site, one sees it across the river. Water on both sides, this is water at the back and the front. The only problem was the site is too small for the programme. We happened to know that, having worked on the planning model. The planning model was this red blob. We were the only non-Dutch architect in the competition. There was also Herman Herzberger, Rem Koolhaas, Kees Christians. I think, much to the consternation of the Dutch, the foreigners won. I think we actually did have an unfair advantage because we knew the site like the back of our hand. Almost all the other ones extended off the site across the water, which was not fitting with the master plan. We developed our blob building a closed object, or we cut it open, or we actually changed the mass of the blob into a skin which still describes a volume, but is quite clearly thin, two-dimensional. This is a continuous skin building. The one surface starts here, wraps right around the building, turns inside and wraps around the auditorium itself. It even then pops out the top to enclose the 40-meter high fly tower. I will show some organizational drawings and explain the building in more detail. Perhaps first, simply about the scale of theatre. In theatres, we've discovered a most fantastic program to work on. There's no other building has a 35-meter high void inside it. No other building has this absolutely precise conceptual geometry, or a traditional theatre at least, which is the audience, the proscenium arch, and the stage. The proscenium arch being this conceptual cut between the world of the viewer, of the world of experience, and the stage, the world of illusion. This theatre is a very traditional theatre. That was one of the requirements. So we were lucky enough to be able to work with this geometry, the proscenium line. Also with the very conventional fly towers. Fly towers are always a very big box. The budget is much lower than anything we would have for our buildings in Germany. The Dutch build quite economically, so These boxes are also pragmatic necessities. They are simply the forms from the inside visible on the outside. The tower is obviously the place where one sends out messages, one puts signs on it. We've discussed a long time whether we should put a media wall on it, but media walls are the most incredible cliche, and they never work, and they're too expensive. And anyway, a media wall is in my opinion, a contradiction. The media comes to you wherever you are, and the media wall is a spectacle where the audience goes to the spectacle. I think the media wall is simply not in the nature of media. We chose instead a quite different and much more traditional form of information distortion, I would say. We call these 5 actors, the anamorphic cast. This is now going to be a permanent installation on the building. We place these 5 figures exactly on the corner of the building. On one side they are true to scale, on the other side stretched, which means when you approach the building from the front, because of the extreme oblique angle one views them, one sees a complete face. The closer you get to the building, the more the figure dissolves. If you come from this side, the same happens for these 2 faces. It's simply spaces which come in and out of focus. I think geometry, or the geometry of optics, always has been part of architecture, and here we're doing something fairly simple, something which is part of Baroque architecture, but here one finds anamorphosis absolutely straightforward with the computer. You just click the stretch button and you have it. But the trick is where to put it. It's not how to do it. It's to line that up with the context, with the street corner, so that it actually works. Geometries. The sort of conceptual cone of vision. This is actually the auditorium shape above, which lines up also structural columns here and basically organizes the building. Also a very logical Cartesian grid. One always has that in planning. This is the ground floor plan. This level here. So one sees here not the complete spiral, almost the shadow of the spiral, because the red facade is at a high level. But what one sees here is the sequence of movement, how one comes in at this point. Here one sees the line of the proscenium arch in the stage on the first floor is extended outside the auditorium, and the line of the proscenium becomes the exact line of the entrance. So the audience, when moving from the space of the city to the House of Illusion, they also cross this line. They also move from one world to another. There's a few simple organizational things. To the harbour at the south we have a restaurant, we have a backstage on this side, below stage here, cloakrooms here. A sequence of movement which follows the spiral movement of the building plan. People come in here and then filter off up various staircases to the upper levels. The problem of the site being too small, we solved with the geometry of truck turnings. One of the requirements of the competition we won was that the stage be at first floor level. Simply because the site is too small, the ground level must be more open, more permeable for public facilities. If the stage was at ground, one wouldn't have a foyer. We worked out a system. Well, I think almost all the other contestants went way off the site with truck ramps, getting the trucks up to the first floor level, or else completely filled in very, very important south-facing promenades of quays to the water. We worked a long time. I think the key to the building is the length of ramp one needs to get from ground level to first floor level. Then trucks drive in here and back in here. Here we have 3 loading bays. So the form of the building is the minimal geometry needed for trucks to drive in and out. 3 18-meter long delivery trucks. I think this is a very, very straightforward level of commodity. The theatre shows are here sometimes only for one night, sometimes for weeks. So the trucks have to get in, they have to stay here, they have to unload directly at stage level. So we have this very curious building where delivery trucks drive right through it. This was our competition model. We developed this big zigzag truss, so the trucks are also seen from the outside. So the whole building stands on this podium of delivery. We make this the subject of the building. One sees here the plan, the sort of wrapping facade, also now wrapping the auditorium. Also void spaces here for acoustic reasons. You know, the truck ramp has to be totally separate from the auditorium. The next level up, one finds people coming up these stairs, and the truck ramp, the roof of the truck ramp, it's a box, a closed volume. The roof of the truck ramp becomes an architectural promenade. It's a very long, slow staircase where one moves slowly through the building to the main foyer at the south. Some people whose seats are on this side will filter off and will filter into the auditorium before reaching the conclusion, and then continue that journey at the interval. So various or different people have different sequences for exploring, for finding the extent of the building. The placement of the building on the site is due to this truck ramp as well. We only had one point where trucks could arrive, so we had to do this very curious thing. Normally one has auditorium and front of house, sort of entrance from this side. We had to flip the building around completely, put the stage to the front. This is the street corner here. And put our backstage facilities to the street. It turned out the theatre people were very pleased with this because they spend their whole day there. They work there doing and want to be sort of in contact with the life of the city. They don't want to be tucked away on some back corner. So we put this sort of active zone and wrapping around the stage. These changing rooms, etc., have to be very close to the stage, of course, for actors getting in and out quickly. And this is the green room where the actors have hang about before going on stage or have their parties afterwards. This is upper level foyers. Here we see the sort of floors starting to disappear and very large windows to the south, to the harbour, and also an upper foyer to the north with a view back to the centre of Rotterdam, a view of Ben's Bridge, very spectacular. So one sees here the sequence actually ends at this point. One's been a few times around the auditorium, various bar spaces which can be rented for private functions. Very literal, very functional plan. But I think, we hope, very exciting spatially. This is the auditorium itself. Actually, this is from our competition model. It was required to have 3 balconies. We've put here a very big screen on the side to actually to sort of join together the balconies and the stage, so that it feels like a single room. This screen, through the working out of the building, turned out we couldn't do a literal screen. It had to be acoustically transparent, which I think is a very nice definition of a wall which sound can go through but sight cannot go through. We also have a whole, actually this is not the final scheme, we have a series of panels on the ceiling which can be lowered to change the volume of the auditorium. One needs a different reflection time for opera or for electronically magnified voices for musicals. We're working with the Dutch artist Jaap van Lieshout here to develop big fiberglass clouds, which would look a bit like sort of giant papadums, sort of, which can be lifted and lowered over the ceiling of the building. And back to the outside, our competition entry, we proposed a wooden facade. Vitruvius wrote, Omnia lignia publica theatre, all our public theatres made of wood. I think wood always has been the traditional material for theatres. The theatre is something a little bit outside the normal city, something a little bit dangerous as well. The Shakespeare Globe, of course, was a wooden building as well. We revised this wooden facade very quickly after having done the competition. First of all, wood is a material one has to get close to see its actual qualities, its sort of haptic qualities. I think a public building like this one is simply too far away. Wood also looks fantastic when finished, and after 5 years, if one uses cedar, which we propose, it turns a very nice grey. I think a very soft material fits well in a landscape, but not the right material here. So we changed from wood to a wood-like construction. We wanted the building to look almost like a giant rowboat. So we've developed this facade with fibre cement. We have to say fibre cement to the politicians in Rotterdam, because if they hear the word Eternit, they will say, we don't want an Eternit building. It's a really cheap material. But these are Eternit panels. we've detailed it so well that it's elevated from being a poor material to a rich material. Eternit panels, one can, if one doesn't want any visible fixings, one can only do them a maximum 30 centimeters high, fix them at the top, and then they sort of hang there like the slats on a boat. Air comes in here to ventilate the facade. We wanted also these shadow lines, so the facade really does look like a giant rowboat. And with this sort of panel, we can achieve these facades which curve in the vertical as well as the horizontal direction. So the building will now be this tomato red color. This is the site. This is sort of actor number 1, number 2, and the Luxor Theatre will be here. Our first work in Rotterdam was actually this, as I said before, landscaping this quay, this waterfront edge here. I think the word landscape for us is becoming important, or an important part of our work. The Euro-Landschaft, or Euro-landscape, is a term we introduced a few years ago as a sort of matrix condition, which describes the whole of the European map as an urbanized matrix, not particularly dense, but actually in type, almost the same as Tokyo, simply 10 times less dense. I think the idea of landscape as the carrier of objects has always been part of our projects. Alvin once wrote something in one of our AA catalogues about Bolus and Wilson preparing a landscape and then strewing objects across it, which is exactly what we did here. We literally prepared the landscape because this whole quay stands on columns in the water. It was simply cheaper to make a table than it was to make land. Ben van Berkel's bridge lands here. Our job was to get people from the bridge level down to the quay level, so a drop of 1.5 meters. We have here a basalt carpet which folds down and folds into the water. We've built on the end, I've shown it at the AA before, so I won't say too much about it, this bridge controller's house. I think for us the theme house runs through all of our work as well. Simply this small object which is about habitation, about dwelling, or where the dwelling is actually associatable to a particular occupant. The bridge watcher. This house is actually occupied 24 hours a day. The people from the harbour sit up here in this bridge or on this deck watching the shipping traffic. Their job is to open and close the various lifting bridges in Rotterdam. This one in the background, the Hef Bridge, stays permanently open now, but I think hopefully it's staying as a sort of a monument to the sort of 19th century industrial architecture. There's another lifting bridge here. In fact, they sit in this window, but even though we designed them a wonderful window, they chose to sit with their backs to the window, and they actually watch a virtual river. They've got a radar on top of their tower, and they watch the whole river on their radar screens. I think this is, again, this idea of this border between material and immaterial. Both coexist here. One has direct visual contact, and also this sort of virtual world this virtual world of infrastructure, of urban choreography as well. This is the sort of reciprocal view. This is the ship captain's view. Ship captain also watching the city, watching the river on his radar, but seeing our bridge watcher's house out his window. This is the quay itself, with the bridge watcher's house on the corner, the carpet coming down, a garden of what we call electronic rocks. One saw light coming out from underneath them before. A colonnade here to visually distinguish the space of the street from the space of the waterfront. This is meant to be a quiet sitting space. In fact, people fishing in Rotterdam come and sit on these little pins we've placed in the pavement here. We're just doing a planning study for the final piece of this ensemble, which is a restaurant to be built here on the quay. This was part of our original plan, but then postponed until there were enough office towers around to provide customers for the restaurant. So one sees these projects actually. One can't say this building is just finished. We actually started working on this quay, I think, in 1992, so ages ago. The quay itself was finished 2 years ago. The bridge watcher's house, depending on which side one approaches it, is completely different. Here, from the east, the house sort of grows out of the table. One sees here the land is actually a table. This is sort of one object. From the south, a yellow glazed brick facade, a very sort of sculpted mass, a cut-out mass. Here one can read the function as well. Here one sees the bridge watchers have to be at a height of 15 meters. There was simply no function to fill this volume. So I think the usefulness actually caused this building to happen rather than any external concept. Also these legs, we only have two possible points here where we can drop the load of our building. So the geometry of these legs is not some willful design, it's simply joining up potentialities of the site. One sees here the plan, this sort of curious triangular building with the bridge watchers sit here in the front with their big window, also the little balcony to the back, the lift and stair in the corner, and the kitchen here. The top floor is all their radar and computer equipment. Their stair is also external. They use every day the lift. They sort of shoot straight to the top. Here's another little square which we call the garden of fixed numbers. This maybe also goes back to the figuration Moysen referred to. I think for us, we've almost moved on completely from the subject of figuration. I think figuration implies a reading of a building like a text, and I think architecture actually communicates in a different way, in a much slower way, a much more indirect way. One simply feels architecture. So sometimes one hears the word aura. I was a day or two ago in the Barragan house in Mexico, and I've never been in a space which has more aura than that. One simply feels the space, and it's nothing like any picture. Simply to be there, to be on that stair or going through that door, that's something which architecture in first hand has, which no drawing, which no simulation can communicate. And I think that's the real magic of architecture. That's why we spend most of our time building these things, because they're there. That's what it's about. Oh, here we have, so maybe a little end of figuration or a burying of figuration. All the piers in Rotterdam have numbers. When ships can no longer dock there, when they're taken out of service, they lose their numbers. So we, in planning this quay, we took the number this pier used to have and strewed the numbers across the pavement and then embedded them in the pavement as aluminium blocks. We've actually now forgotten ourselves the sequence they should be in. It somehow is architecture is about memory, but also about forgetting. But this is a little sort of archaeology of the site. And also buildings, of course. Buildings are there at daytime and at nighttime. They're there when photographers make fantastic pictures of them. They're also there in the fog. And I think this is as interesting as this, as a way of seeing a building. Here one sees the whole extent of the quay, sort of folded in the middle, colonnade, Ben's Bridge. And the construction site, because here I think again, this moving of material. Here one sees the quay standing on legs in water, the edge in wood in case boats do bump against it, the required slopes for drainage being built up by this sort of rock mover here. This guy sort of working his way around one of our electronic rocks. And the bridge watcher's house under construction. One sees here concrete tower and steel frame. The idea is that when one walks down this ramp, one looks through this sort of frame view of the bridge watcher's house at this second frame view of the Hef Bridge. So there's this sort of sequence of sightlines across the city. Yeah, I said the idea of house has been for us always a sort of a cornerstone of our projects. Actually, our very first proper building, was in London, the Blackburn House. We've since then only done 2 or 3 small-scale residential projects. One, the Suzuki House, which I don't want to explain tonight in detail. This was the Suzuki House in Tokyo. Incredibly small house, 5 by 7 meters. A house which nevertheless I think contains an enormous amount of spatial complexity, or simply finding within that given straitjacket sort of architectural potentialities from necessities like parking cars. Cars are not allowed to be parked on the street in Tokyo. We have to lift the volume of the house up. The house itself, we make it as one concrete box, one single room with sleeping balconies inside and a roof terrace on top. There is also a sort of narrative here, which I don't want to go into, about this black shape on the facade. We call it sometimes a house glanced by a passing ninja. The ninja for us was a sort of metaphor for invisible information. So Tokyo is as the electronic city, the city which is being daily swamped by this sort of rain of information. We sort of wanted to somehow make this visible, that the house, that the architecture itself is also maybe slightly affected by that. This is not a painted shape. We actually cast this into the concrete work, 1 centimeter deeper than the outer surface of the house. In Germany, we've only been commissioned to do one very small private house, or in fact a conversion of a private house. The house Dub, the family are called Mr. and Mrs. Dub, D-U-B. They bought a very nice, a fantastic modernist house from the 50s, flat roof, courtyard, atrium house, which had been in the interim somewhat messed up. The sort of organization didn't work. So they asked us to do a very small intervention, simply to stop the sun coming into their living room. This is the south elevation of their living room. And to add a little studio to what used to be an outside space here. Here we added simply one blue rectangle. These are actually leftover blue bricks from our library in Münster, blue glazed bricks. A living room with windows at sitting height, windows at standing height. This looks like a technical failure, but in fact it's just rained and the window's doing what it should do. It keeps the water off the facade. And this second little studio piece, this piece horizontal, this piece vertical. This is a little studio with wood panelled wall inside, metal outside, and vertical slit windows. And one third plane, this sunscreen. It's here photographed in winter, but in summer one gets a little shading sitting corner here. I think both these buildings are about domesticity. They're simply buildings which we find the users really like living in. They're developed with very long and close consultation with the user. I think this is commodity in the Vitruvian sense. Also little houses perhaps, but much less fixed. I think buildings don't always belong to one site. There is the Germans have a fantastic legal term which they call fliegende Bauten, sort of flying buildings, which means sort of temporary buildings. We were commissioned last year, or we did a small competition and won it, from Daimler-Benz to design an exhibition pavilion to be built in 6 different German cities and then to be built at the Hanover Expo. The Daimler-Benz don't want to advertise their cars, but they very cleverly invented a subject. The exhibition in these pavilions was to be called the future of mobility. So the buildings were mobile and the subject is mobile. This is our competition. When one says competition, we were simply given 1 week to come up with ideas. So we made these little pods, these little sort of things with light inside them, simply because any larger structure one couldn't erect in 2 days. This whole thing had to be put up in 2 days. We also invented the idea of a service beam made from containers, shipping containers, which gave us our whole, or gave us the module of the whole scheme. These are also from our first presentation. We called the whole thing the Nomad Pod Village. I think this is more to do with sort of advertising the concept than the actual detail of the building. But one sees this composition, 3 different pods, each with very different shapes. They're actually made from inflatables. So very curiously, I phoned Doug Branson, Nigel Coates' partner, while we were working on these, and they said, "Oh, we're doing pods." And I said, "Oh, we are too." But theirs were built on the Horse Guards Parade, and very nice, and unfortunately ours have been scrapped, because when Mercedes joined with Chrysler said they were too expensive. So we won't be building this. But nevertheless, here we explored a whole new technology, quite different from anything we'd built before, quite different from our massive objects. This is the idea that these pods might somehow turn up in Berlin, so next to the Palast der Republik, or the Berlin Cathedral. We went quite a long way with developing these. This is a potential layout with 3 pods and service beam. This is a much later stage with laminated timber beams joined by a ring beam at the top, and then these cushions between each beam and the service beam down service backbone on the side, and the whole thing stands on a platform, and it has to have a very level surface. Various constellations are possible with these pods as well. The exhibition inside was being done by a firm of exhibition organisers. We were responsible for the image, this image of mobility, something between high tech and a sort of very ethnic tent. One sees here these stacked up containers, one cafe container here, some offices here, a luxury suite for the directors of Mercedes when they come to visit it, and a tower like a sort of an advertisement, so saying here we are in the city, we're here in Stuttgart or we're here in Berlin. So unfortunately that's one of our failures. Here's another one of our failures. We get nearly all of our work. I think maybe my talk tonight is more sort of a report on everyday life with Boris Wilson. One must say one has very frustrating weeks or months. A lot of projects, we spend a lot of time doing competitions. We get almost all our work from competitions. Sometimes, like this one, invited competition with 5 architects. Here we won the first prize. This is a building for the Special Services Police in the north of Germany, the sort of secret police, the ones who do all the anti-terrorist stuff. So if we had won the first prize, I couldn't show it to you tonight. No, and if ours was being built, I couldn't show it to you tonight. But as the police chose to build the second prize, I can at least show you our concept. They were very sneaky, the secret police. They wouldn't look us in the eye and say, we don't want your building. They just went away and we didn't hear from them for a few months, and so we guessed they'd done something else. Nevertheless, I think this comes back to our sort of concept of mass, of these sort of heavy, fairly substantial buildings, quite the opposite of the moving pods. Very briefly, the context, it's in the city of Duisburg. Again, Foster has done a master plan here. I think almost every harbour in Europe has been master planned by Foster. Then they call him Boris Wilson to make it work. Here's the Ruhr. This is the sort of industrial heartland of Germany, or the post-industrial heartland. Here, Autobahn going to Holland, an incredible site with all this infrastructure, Autobahn train line, canal. And here's the city centre. So the harbour obviously is going to become sort of part of the city centre. Almost like our Luxor Theatre in Rotterdam, they found one very big function to put here to give the whole thing some substance. The secret police didn't want to be here. They wanted to be hidden away in some corner where no one saw them. We put them inside this very simple form. It's the same philosophy as our office building that we completed 2 years ago in Münster. A sort of a flexible outside skin with offices running all the way around the outside. Here the building was big enough that we have large atriums inside. In the bottom is a huge car parking deck where they fit cars out with all sorts of equipment. They wouldn't tell us what they do. They said even the policemen who work in the building don't know what goes into these cars. I think one gets into quite curious worlds with projects like this. The sort of security is also a virtual subject. Another frustrating project. The other one, we got the first prize and didn't build it. Here we got prize 1B, which means if prize 1A is too expensive, they might come back to us. They haven't yet. This is very recent, a month or two ago. Another limited competition, 5 architects invited. Incredible site again. This is in Cologne. Here's the Rhine, the Cologne Cathedral in the background. The railway bridge everyone knows, the sort of where the tourist ships stop. And the Deutsche Brücke, there's a second bridge here, the car bridge coming into the centre of the city. The city of Cologne, incredibly cleverly, are selling a site to the museum. This is a museum. It's called the Museum der Duft, the Museum of Smell, or the Museum of Aroma. Also, here one finds again this coming together of immaterialities, smell as a subject, and architecture as the container. The city found a site for this entrepreneur, which is these are off-ramps of the bridge, so there is actually no site. So at ground level, it's completely occupied by infrastructure and cars, but one can put a few legs down here and there. And it's for me, it was exactly the sort of project one looked for at the, when teaching at the AA. Some site which looks impossible. You find an incredible program, and if you can get it together, the whole thing really adds something to the city. I think whether ours or Prize 1A, that something will be built here. The building simply has to fly above the bridge. It's a sort of a beam with a finger lining up with the houses at the front here, and the back edge. There's a public or a large square at the back here, which has at the moment having an underground car park built underneath it. One sees here under our building. Also, the entrance to the underground car park is under our building and the car park. And there are 5 or 6 trees on the site which had to stay, one in the middle of the building, because the developer had the support of the Green Party, which he would lose if we took the trees away. Here's a very large orangerie, where trees grow, which one uses for making various perfumes. There are, in our scheme, strange sort of objects inside, like sort of beakers, like sort of chemical instruments for making various perfumes. Now, the client is actually a perfumier. The building will be, I think, a lot to do with marketing perfumes. They've invented a very curious technology. They've invented a type of salon with, I think, 150 seats, where they can flush through from the bottom to the top 3 different smells per minute. So they're going to do this sort of 1-hour sensorama with sort of smells rushing past you, hopefully nice ones. So the whole point was how to get, and this smell chamber needs an enormous amount of sort of smell preparation below, and then as the smells whoosh through, and then I guess go off into the air in Cologne. So I think Eau de Cologne will have a whole new meaning soon. But that was Prize 1B. A little more joy here. Another competition. Also an invited competition in the city of Magdeburg. Magdeburg is in the former East Germany. It was a Prussian administration center, a very beautiful Prussian city with a cathedral which was bombed almost entirely flat in the Second World War and then cut right through the middle by Stalinist alleys, axial streets. The historic buildings replaced by prefabricated housing. A building which certainly has layers, but incredibly violent layers. It's quite terrifying to walk through. Nevertheless, the cathedral square has been at least sensitively restored. The cathedral, one of the best cathedrals in Germany, restored, and the Baroque city government buildings reconstructed, a sort of 1970s Baroque, I think. One sees here, this is a photograph from 5 years after the unification of Germany, a sort of crazy building. The whole city is being sort of restructured. I think there's a sort of mania in Germany at the moment for pulling all of these down and putting up blocks. Basically, it's not entirely necessary. It's more about erasing one history and imposing over it another history. I think it's sometimes quite a dubious political use of urban planning. There is in the East now a certain reaction against this sort of Berlin ideology of the blocks are always good, because these blocks are now finished. There's the stations here, and there's some shopping centres here, and they are not all that different to the communist blocks. So on this block has been pulled down, and we worked on a competition for this side, one side of the cathedral square. Here they wanted, I think that there's a second generation of buildings being looked for in the east of Germany now. Not the first sort of developer rush of put up quick, make a profit. Not maybe the exportation of Berlin ideology, sort of only blocks are good. And they're looking for some sort of liveliness. And I think that's why maybe we were invited to this competition. 2 years ago there had been an urban planning competition for the site, simply to have a structural pattern for the whole area, which Ungers had won. So the part of the master plan for the area was to do 2 separate blocks on this site with a cut in the middle on the axis of the building on the other side. Ungers was also in the competition, but I think Ungers is seen now as belonging to the Berlin Mafia, and the Boris Wilson entry here, which sort of took blocks but sort of cut rather radically into them, won the first prize. So this is for us now the biggest project we've ever had. We're actually totally terrified how we're going to handle it. We have to build 2 blocks here, one very special facade to the Cathedral Square, one facade to this main street. The functions are, in this one, a bank. The bank are actually the client for the whole building. Here, the finance ministry for Sachsen-Anhalt, that's the state. And here, the Chamber of Commerce, also for Sachsen-Anhalt. And we proposed here also some cultural functions, a sort of a local art institute. The ground floor will be shopping. They want a sort of upper, high-level shopping, restaurants, cafes, etc. at ground level. So this becomes a sort of cultural center of the city. We cut these sort of pre-given blocks once on the given axis here. There's a second church here which they wanted to be visible from the square, and once here. So this division into 3 simply matched the program. We took these blocks. Maybe the next slide's better. The block perimeters. We've done 4-floor office facades, 1 continuous band. I think a fairly sober solution, and then at the roof line we introduced these vector-like roof beams, which start telling other stories about the city, or the gallery function here, sort of starting to relating to the sort of upward movement of the cathedral. This is our competition model. We had a red facade, actually here a wooden facade behind glass. The first thing our bankers said to us after we'd won was, we can't possibly build a red facade. They said red is ideologically occupied in the former communist countries. Sorry, big mistake. So we've changed it to a blue facade. The bankers are happy, but the people of Magdeburg are now really upset because they're very nostalgic for red. So we're now in this sort of middle of this red-blue discussion. These are part of our competition drawings. They're sort of a computer animation. The building's drawn very abstract, without windows. This is a project we're just starting to work on. This is a project, I may want to show 2 slides. It's a work in progress. One we've been working on for 3 years now in the office, actually 4 years. No, 5 years. We did a competition 5 years ago, which we lost. And the first prize was appalling, but the first prize winner played golf with one of the commissioners. Luckily, the planners, this is an office building in Münster. Luckily, the planners said you will never get planning permission for this building. This is simply bad architecture. And so after a very long fight, they forced the client to do a second competition. So we had a fight off again with the winner, and this time we won it. And I think this is incredibly good planning. The planners actually intervening, saying, we will use our authority here to force a user to do something which is better for the city. Luckily, the city owned a strip of land which crosses the site, which is a bicycle route from the city to the suburbs. So we're doing a building which wraps over this bicycle route, and the city simply refused to sell this land unless the Wallace-Wilson scheme was built. So it's nice to have supporters. This is a section through this route here, an office building with a brick base. On one side, buildings which connect to houses with pitched roofs. So here it's one of our perennial problems, how to deal with the pitched roof. And people want them, we don't want to do them, so sometimes we build half a house to keep everyone happy. This is our sort of cut through the building where we've actually cut away different floor levels on the underneath. So here we have simply the corridor of the office building, a very permeable building there. Here we have offices on one side and still the passage on the other. So from here, a very monumental opening, and then the top is sort of a few office floors. I don't want to show that in detail. That's a project which will be finished in a year or so's time, and maybe we'll have another opportunity. Another project, also, which is even further on the way on site. This is in Holland. This project will be finished in January next year. 2 years ago, we started building. One sees sort of architecture is also incredibly violent. This was a picture from the local newspaper. This poor lady sort of thought she'd been transposed to some war zone. The centre of her city disappeared overnight. This is an inner city commercial centre in the city of Hengelo, which is on the border between Germany and Holland. a fairly small city. It used to be an industrial city, destroyed in the Second World War, reconstructed with a very simple, modernist, gridded plan. The buildings after the war were fairly low-key, one or two floors. One quite big 60s office building. Now the city is doing 5 or 6 quite large-scale developments to really to compete in this race of cities, and to have architecture to represent them, and also to have much bigger urban functions. For example, a department store, a very big department store in this building. What we're doing here is knitting together a very complex set of found conditions. One found condition, the market square, so quite what used to be a rectangular space. At the other end is the railway station square. Our scheme is actually a passage from one to the other. This line you see here is a 100-meter long shopping passage with an inflatable roof. This is also the same technology we were working with for our Mercedes pods. It's a sort of 100-meter long cigar-shaped roof. We've put all the steelwork inside, so it hopefully will look quite cloud-like. We have various shops here. Shopping is basically a one-floor function, so we get this great pancake in the city. Normally one puts housing on top to give it a perimeter, to make it look like a block. We wanted to make this space even more urban, so we stacked our housing at both ends, once here and once at the other end. And so we do this sort of bookend-like building. So we're basically doing shopping passage and housing here, and then one very large, very clear geometric form, this sort of trapezoidal roof with bigger functions, and the department store. These two objects, in collaboration with this existing one, these two are the same height, form a new shopping square. And as part of our competition, we proposed, using absolutely sort of traditional urbanism, we proposed to do a sort of double square like St. Mark's in Venice. One has two squares which have a hinge point, and the hinge point is the Campanile. Hengelo has a town hall, quite a well-known building in Holland from the 50s with an Italianate Campanile. We proposed here to do this sort of the commercial equivalent, a little bit lower naturally, but respectful, or we're forming a sort of a family with the town hall. We told the mayor of Hengelo that if he keeps on building towers like this, Hengelo could become the San Gimignano of Holland. He liked that, and I think that's maybe one reason we got the commission. So above the ground, this very complex morphology of pieces fitting together, but looking like individual objects. Underground, an absolutely brutal rationality. This was also part of our competition strategy, and I think why the investors favoured us. I think most of our projects are actually based on a sort of a pragmatism. One has certain things which have to be done, certain budgets which have to be met. We try always to take these pragmatic limitations and to conceptualize them, to flip them over, to make them into subjects. Underground, linking all of these buildings, the shopping passage runs down, I think, this axis. The department store is somewhere over there. The tower is actually outside this underground car park. Underneath we have a one-floor, 400-car car park. It's enormously big. It's like Archizoom's non-stop city. We have here, I think this is also a sort of, for us, a landscape, a sort of underground landscape. In fact, a few weeks ago, last time I went down there, they hadn't yet done the paving. They're doing something which the Dutch call the klein polder principle. It's the small polder principle. They don't actually seal the floor. They just leave it open earth, and the rainwater which gets in is pumped out of the earth. Before the paving was laid, the whole floor was sand. It was like this 100-meter long underground beach. Most extraordinary space. One couldn't invent it in one's wildest fictitious moments. We wanted to use all the necessary traffic symbols as a sort of an iconography, or as a sort of figuration here, but a very logical figuration. So the actual planning grid of the building becomes the organizational system of the car park, so that you know when you're on column I here, and the parking bays are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So you can actually tell where you've parked, and one gets this sort of landscape of letters, which are also our construction grids for building. So these columns get painted yellow, and you get this sort of super graphic overlay. Above ground, as I said, these three separate objects, each with its own material language. This is the department store. With buildings like this, the architect only does the skin. He does the outer 50 centimeters. Everything inside is done by the shop. the unfortunately named, the department store is named V&D, a very unfortunate but successful firm, unfortunately named but successful firm in Holland. We wanted to do a single, almost like a spaceship which had landed in the city. A building which at one side is 3 floors high to give the urban presence, and one side 2 floors high to a more modest street. One single roof which then folds down at the corners. The site is not exactly trapezoidal, so our roof hangs over at this corner and this corner. So we use simply the folding of the roof to give us a very deep beam holding up the corner. This is a month or so ago now, the sort of corrugated aluminium skin going on this building. This is the housing building, also a week or two ago. The housing, as I said, shopping, pancake, 1 floor, both ends, bookends, housing. This is the housing facade to the shopping square with one of our sort of woven facades, sort of vertical and horizontal windows mixed and woven together. The building itself is meant to be sort of almost like a Chillida sculpture, like one mass with sort of cut out pieces. We're using sort of a brick facade here of a very sort of solid, earthy material. And almost finished. The tower is 40 meters high. It will in the end stand on a cube of glass which will at night time emit light. So it'll be almost as if the mass of the tower stands on light, on something quite ephemeral. Maybe with luck, we're negotiating now to try and get an art group to put a video pavilion in here. So this light will also be emitting information. The top of the tower will be a large LED screen, simply huge numbers with the time. This is a sort of sandwich between light, or between information, and mass. The mass of the building is this sort of trunk. You can see it's a steel frame with precast white concrete panels. We've developed a system here for the same panel being used again and again, wrapping around the tower. We wanted, I think influenced by Moysen's book on weathering, we wanted this building to get better as it gets older, as it gets dirtier. I think Moysen wrote wonderfully about the department store in Rotterdam by Marcel Breuer about how the facade was designed so that the stains of rainwater would actually bring out another latent pattern in the building. We know our white concrete will stain. These are open joints. The water will run along and run down in the worst possible places. So we took the name of the square, Brink. Brink means meeting place in Dutch. And we embossed Brink into the white concrete panels. It's something one can do in the computer in sort of 10 seconds. You sort of press the scale button, Brink big, Brink small, Brink here. Luckily, they found a very good precast concrete casting firm, and these panels are absolute artworks. And this Brink sort of runs now from bottom to top, and will hopefully become even clearer when the building starts staining. The building also has various projections, one to each direction, one to the shopping square, one to one side street, one to the market square, which will be rented out as advertisement windows. Well, one sees much better here. There's the Brink panels, and how the street or how the towers are placed very carefully on various axes, so one sees it from far away in the city. A few other projects where we're back to the failures after a few successes. This was another competition for a large cinema center. In German, K is for Kino. It's also for kindergarten. Some of you might remember our kindergarten in Frankfurt, which had a large K window inscribed in the facade. Here, as our work in the intervening 6 or 7 years has moved from figuration, from text, from reading to actual volume, to mass. Here we took the K not simply or not only as words, but also as building form. We found the letter K made a most incredible building. Functionally, it works very well for stacking up cinema spaces. These cinemas are 40 meter wide, which is the maximum span of precast concrete floor slabs. So one simply has to build a steel frame wall here, which cantilevers from the core. They counterbalance each other. It's like the principle of the Firth of Forth Bridge. They counterbalance each other. And one can almost see the Firth of Forth Bridge sort of buried in here. and we get this sort of required functional sort of cone of vision or cone of projection for cinema, and also this very dramatic form in the landscape. It was much too much for the cinema investor. He was sort of, I think his hair stood on end when he saw it. A much smaller K. We were asked a year ago for the Verdute Foundation, which is a sort of an arts foundation in Holland. The Verdute Foundation commissioned architects and artists each to make a book-like object for their collection. They don't have or actually I think they do now have a permanent base. But when they do an exhibition, they simply put up a big bookshelf in some space, and somebody there demonstrates their books. The books, one's asked to do a book based on the proportions of the Gutenberg Bible. One's given these proportions, and one's given a subject, the relationship between material and text. Everybody for the last 10 years who's made one of these, I think they commission 4 or 5 every year, has had the same subject. So we of course were obliged to use our K. There was nothing else we could do if it was text and material. So here we did another almost K building. We found that here this one is almost like a tunnel, like a telescope. One sees little people inside it here. But the top one we get a folded telescope, so we had to put a mirror in the middle here so that one could see from one side to the other through it. And we found that K had this very strange latent geometry inside it, that when you look in one side, the people are standing on the floor, and if you look in the other side, they're on the ceiling. The mirror inverts. It's not particularly deep, actually, but as an Australian, I like it a lot. Also, this relationship between sort of architecture maybe as carrier of information and information itself, which is simply much faster than architecture, which today needs a quite different technology. It needs computer programs, and it needs maybe LED screens, or it needs a computer monitor. This is back to our waterfront in Rotterdam. There was one more piece to it, which I didn't show at the start. Here's Ben's Bridge again. Here we built a tower of moving numbers, which is the sort of the pair with the Garden of Fixed Numbers. This was a little sort of sculptural piece meant to describe the sort of dynamism of this new city district. We simply put stood up a pin, hung a cage, a concrete beam hanging on very thin wires. Actually, we wanted the wires to be thicker, but our engineer did his job really well and made them as thin as possible. So we made this sort of urban scale budgerigar cage for electronic information, and inside these 5 different light boxes, some of them giving this sort of usual sort of banal information. When one talks about information, I think it is very much in the McLuhan sense. The media is the massage. The media is media is media. The temperature or time is it's always the same. Here we have a 0, 0, 0, a heartbeat. Here we have a cube of random numbers, and here we have the world population, which changes really quickly at the bottom here. So it's like a burning cigarette. That's the piece itself, the bridge, and one of the little drawings showing how one fits this sort of circular black box onto a circular column. I think here the architecture, the physical part of it was reduced to the minimum, as simply as carrier. Here the same subject, the subject of light. I think again we're back to the statement I made at the start of the lecture about material and immaterial. Light essential to architecture, but immaterial. We're here doing a project for a lighting company, the firm of Staff Zumtobel, one of the biggest lighting firms in Europe, who in the 50s made fantastic lights, and also very good advertisements, very nice use of media. They asked us to do an exhibition space in an existing warehouse building, a 1,000 square meter floor of a production hall. We have to basically do an interior landscape which has no exterior. It's a sort of contextless world. I think also a very interesting condition today. I think not all architectures are sited. Some architectures are sort of completely divorced from this site. They could be anywhere. This is the interior we made. The existing hall was simply painted black like a theatre, so when it's there you can see it, but it's not part of the concept. I'll move on quickly here. To geometrically organize this building, I think for all of our buildings, for the Münster Library, for the theatre in Rotterdam, or for here, the plan is the important diagram. The plan is the sort of the image which holds everything together. Of course, architects are always trying to fight against the plan, saying it's two-dimensional, and inventing three-dimensional animation systems to actually see the building three-dimensionally. But my opinion is that any architect who really designs architecture thinks three-dimensionally. The plan is simply a code where you can put on a piece of paper something which you have in your head three-dimensionally. One possibly needs computer modeling to show to non-architects how it will be, but if you as the designer don't know in your head what happens sort of directly above you or directly below you, then you're not in control of the building. So here's a plan. The 1,000 square meters to start with. Our first concept, well, we divided this building into three clear concepts. One, we called it the second skin. We put a wall, an interior wall, a white plaster wall around the edge. The subject here is actually light itself, not the light fittings. They wanted actually to thematicize light. So we say, well, then you have to have simply a white wall here that you can shine light onto. So with our second skin, we get big office spaces here, a reception here, a little meeting room here, a bar here, storage here, way through to another building here, and another meeting room here, and here's some light laboratories with some ceilings which go up and down to simulate various lighting conditions. So the first concept is the skin. The second is the floor. For the floor plan, we took very simply this sort of dumb diagram that every light product on the market has, the light distribution curve. The light distribution curve is of course only readable if you have the measuring matrix underneath. So we made this whole building like a distribution diagram. So when you walk in, you're almost becoming a light particle yourself. You're walking through the distribution diagram. We marked on the floor like sports halls these degree numbers and also these distribution lines. Then we found a light curve which was about the most useful shape, and we placed it here, and this becomes, we call it built light. It's actually, in the end, has very little to do with light. It becomes a wall. This is a conference room in the middle of this space. So here one sees from the outside the second skin, the floor, and this wall taking its curve from a light diagram, also separated from the floor by light coming from within the wall, also on the inside separated from the floor. So it's not light itself, but it is a materialization of a typical light curve. Inside the conference room, a heavily installed ceiling. Here they do schooling sometimes for light technicians or for architects or for architectural students in the possibilities of lighting. They have, I think, they have an enormous range of lighting possibilities in this room, sort of computer programmed ceiling. Here we recessed all this technology 10 centimeters behind the ceiling plane so that the ceiling itself still maintained its integrity. Both the outside and the inside have this cherry wood paneling. It's a very strong, very warm sort of material presence against all the coldness of the light everywhere. One sees here this technological ceiling separated from the wall. At the back of the auditorium, we needed a very small cabin for a translator, because often people come from different countries to be schooled here, so they have a simultaneous translation person sitting inside the wall here. The question is simply how one details it, how one actually, a single wall becomes two walls, it's sort of peeling away, or how one gets a projection box sort of fitted into the corner of the wall, or this grid here. These are the wall has perforations. It's acoustically absorptive, and these are all functional limitations or functional requirements. I think, and a quote we've been using for years, which I like very much, from Lyotard. Lyotard once wrote, "There are no longer the ground narratives of causality," or something like that. There are only the small narratives of practical opportunity. Most of our architecture is actually put together from these small narratives of practical opportunity. In the end, we can tell you what the whole story is, but we can't tell you at the start, because simply the working through the possibilities of making and of use fill out the building. We have also one large wall with light cutouts in it, and each niche has a different quality of light. And the third concept, the wall, the floor, is the ceiling. We call these technological clouds. They're simply gypsum board plaster rectangles which carry the various light products, something which they can change very quickly when new products come on the market. One sees here our first proposed layout of sort of rectangular clouds. The wall with light again. We also designed a series of objects here because the whole point is to shine light onto something. So we designed little sort of trolleys, very simple geometries on wheels, and we actually had to go out ourselves and buy all this sort of funny stuff because otherwise they would have messed it up with some household objects. So we sort of searched Europe for aesthetic objects. These are actually pots which come from, I think, from China, wrapped in these boxes. So we simply left them in their transport boxes. Yet another project about light, also for Staff Zumtobel. This is a very provisional building, a sort of Fliegende Bauten. This is the building which actually was, it will again be assembled, but it was assembled here only for one day. The building you might recognize, it is San Giorgio Maggiore in Venice. This is the refectory, the dining room, an incredible space, a Palladio space. Geometries which take one's breath away. This sort of circle here, and in this space, this wall panel is also a circle. It's sort of absolutely minimal, absolutely refined. Zumtobel were doing a conference here with chairs, screen, and they asked us to do a little pavilion. For this pavilion, we had to invent a narrative, a story, and simply a box full of light wasn't enough. Knowing Venice, knowing there is a typology of little buildings one finds in Venice. The cabana, those little sort of beach huts where people spend their summers, or changing in and having their siesta in, and then coming or sitting in front of. This sort of home away from home. One knows, of course, the word from cabana and cabanon, French, the Corbusier's cabanon, his retreat in the south of France. One knows also, I think here one gets back into the sort of language we architects speak. One knows also from Colin Rose, mathematics of the ideal villa, the sort of geometric linkages between Palladio and Corbusier. So here we invented this narrative. We'll do a cabana for Palladio, and we'll take the modular from Corbusier's cabanon. So we had to make up various boxes for transport, which are then screwed together on site. So these are all based on the Corbusier's modulus. So here we have this sort of rather contorted, I think, built manifestation of cabana and cabanon. Also a light emitting object. Actually, practical things again. It wasn't only Zumtobel who are showing their lights here. There was also a firm who do stucco lustro. So these cut-out niches here have always at the back of them the yellow or the red here, or this grey corner is in a very expensive stucco lustro. There's another form who make a rather more profane product, a floor linoleum. But they do also do for kindergartens a sort of linoleum intartio. So we said, okay, you can use your linoleum if you give us this P room, P for Palladio, of course, this time not K. And Palladio's chimney, which actually is holding the cable, so this is at the top here, which powers all of these lights. We didn't want any wires across the floor. I think this is simply a game. It's something one is commissioned to do, and one works within the discourse of architecture. I think the slides I'm showing you are sort of oscillating always from the projects which are about less material subjects, and then coming back to these very solid objects. I think the solidity is partly to do with where we are geographically located. We're in a conservative city doing quite straightforward buildings. This is the one we showed at the AA a few years ago, an office building, a local government office building, and the generative model. This is the generative model we actually made in lead. And this is the lead casting, which later became a suitcase to carry it, and the lead then built on site. The point here was this sort of sculptural mass, one continuous skin which wraps around the whole building. The skin made of a very dignified material. These are green glazed bricks, very expensive, 3 Deutschmarks for every brick. we told our client that the quality is simply in the material, and he said, well, at that price, that's the pain limit, but I'll go for that. So we put all of our quality in the brick. I don't want to explain that one any further tonight. Maybe a few smaller recent projects. None of these are sort of grand public buildings. These are all very modest functional buildings, simply housing or offices. This is also in Münster, in one of the suburbs. Here's one of the radial streets leading to the city centre. Block infill, here's a block perimeter. These are all very modest houses. These are post-war reconstruction from the 50s. Here, a very long, thin internal site which could be built on if one is very careful about light angles to neighbouring buildings, and a little hiccup in the street facade to be articulated. Here we use again this sort of dark brick and then white plaster for upper parts of the buildings, or buildings which don't have a weight, which shouldn't have a weight. Which here actually the street runs underneath our buildings through the site. This is a private street which belongs to our client. The client is an insurance company. Simply quite straightforward function housing, or it's all housing with one restaurant on the bottom who put an appalling sign on the corner. We had a big fight, but he won. I think the everyday world does take over one's buildings as well. One does cast them out into the world. They're like children leaving home. They sometimes misbehave. One sees here this sort of jump, the jump in the street facade. Here we take this street along with the black elevation, and here we push the building back and take the higher building across here, and the facade the same height. Here we have a very thin slit between this building and ours, with a staircase leading up to this upper floor maisonette. A very, very, very nice space with a view across the whole city skyline. There's very little one can say about this building in terms of concept. It's actually a building that we're very, very pleased with. It's our first not private housing, simply speculative housing building. And we tried here to give each apartment the same sort of dignity, the same care. I mean, not signed as somebody's apartment, but the same, that each apartment has something which is particularly theirs because of their aspect or because of whichever floor they're on. We were able to close the street in front here to make a sort of piazza, where our staircase is access to. Ground floor, very small apartments for elderly people or for students. Middle floor, in the brick base, apartments with this sort of stepping silhouette, rather like something from J.P. Aud from the 20s. It means each apartment has its own balcony, a very private balcony, because it's only overlooked from their apartment. And in the upper part, which gets thin because of light angles, we have done two-floor maisonettes. They have a terrace to the back, which I don't think we see on the slides I have. Very, very simple details. There's things like the canopy to keep the rainwater off the entrance. It's simply a flat piece of steel held up with a flange on top. Oh. Now we've gone wrong. Now we've gone really wrong. This corner here, one sees here, sort of the facade sort of wrapping around, making this a very modest interior space, backs of the neighbour buildings, and these are cut-out balconies. The upper part, white facades, we always treat white as a sort of abstract plane, which doesn't weigh on the ground and which can be cut in a much more sort of, never has time in lectures to talk about plans, but the plans are what takes the time in housing. One has to have the bedroom to the right side and the kitchen in the right relationship to the living room, etc., etc. Another equally unglamorous project, what we've become to call the Ur landscape, which perhaps is more often referred to as a peripheral landscape, a sort of unstructured, sort of endless field of housing, wasteland, nature, industrial parks, etc. Near where we operate in Germany, in the Ruhr, one finds the whole industrial heartland of Germany undergoing this structural change. Their wish, I think it's the wish of every city in the whole of Europe, is to become the Silicon Valley of Europe. This is a defunct colliery, coal mine, One sees the tower here left, but everything else cleared away. We were commissioned here to do two of the first buildings in this industrial park. It's very close to the town where the coal miners used to live, but actually not part of the town. The planning strategy, which we didn't do, is for solitary buildings with car parks, and it would look like something sort of in the north of London, or like something in America in the end. So there's a field of disparate objects. We've tried here with these two buildings. We've done two side by side. One here, and this one from the other side. We've tried with both of them to also to articulate spaces and a sort of a transition from the tighter spaces of the city to the more open spaces of this new landscape. In fact, the new landscape will probably remain empty for the next 10 years. One finds with such situations as well, there are most extraordinary scenarios occur which are not invented scenarios, they're simply the facts of daily life. For example, this site was heavily polluted. The cheapest method, the second cheapest method, the cheapest method of dealing with it is to make a mountain and seal it with asphalt. And they did that at one end, but on our side where buildings are being built, they actually had to they had to wash the earth. So they took the top 1 meter of the site was dug up, put in trucks and sent to Holland. The Dutch are the experts in pollution management. So our site was sent to Holland. It was like sort of Birnam Wood in Shakespeare, sort of till so Birnam Wood doth come to dance the name. We sent the site to Holland for washing, and it came back 5% lighter. I think the Dutch sold that 5% to the English as landfill. I'm not sure. This is the sort of food chain of Europe. Anyway, that for us was an extraordinary scenario. If one said let's take our site on a holiday, everybody would say this is absurd. You can't talk rubbish like that. The sort of thing some external examiners say. Anyway, these two buildings. One of them, incredibly cheap building for a client we'll never work for again. An absolutely unscrupulous person who is building this building and then renting it to the state. The function is medical insurance for retired coal miners. But basically, it's office and doctors' rooms. He had a fixed rental fee agreed per square meter with his client. So his only interest was in spending as little money as possible. He didn't care about efficient planning because his rental was for circulation or for usable space. So when one didn't have to be efficient, and when one tried to do a good working building, but that wasn't his interest. He also had a sort of very unscrupulous book of qualities, which was agreed in his contract, which he sort of, by sleight of hand, managed to leave certain things like light switches out of, and so we weren't allowed to build light switches in because they were extras. So working for this unscrupulous man, he also in his book of, I'm jumping forward. I'll go forward and then come back. Working for this sort of client that architects shouldn't work for, he said, you're only allowed to have one window type. I'm not paying for anything else. So we said, can we change the window sometime from vertical to horizontal? He said, if it doesn't cost any more. So we changed every second one. And so his box-like building, which gets a little bit bigger on the ground floor because they simply from the program, has this continuous tapestry of windows, vertical and horizontal. Those of you who know Gottfried Semper's definition of the origins of architecture being handcraft will sort of see that sort of here we have an interpretation of weaving. Or else maybe one could read into it Corbu's famous dispute with Auguste Perret. Corbu said windows should be horizontal so one can see the horizon. And Perret said they should be vertical, the proportion of a human being, so one can see the earth and the sky. So here we've resolved yet another architectural dispute. Oops, wrong again. The second building is with slightly better budget and client, but still a very absolutely prosaic function. There are two uses in this building. One is a retraining center for unemployed women. This is an area of very high unemployment. And one is an open university, basically administration rooms and seminar rooms where people who are taking open university courses come actually to meet for seminars. So what we have is seminar rooms, offices, and a conference room. The conference room, much like our department store in Hengelo, is a metal-clad box which looks like it sort of dropped from the sky, doesn't quite land on the ground, and cantilevers 8 meters out at either end. The solid part of the building is made up of a sort of service core with entrance staircase, a big void space here, one sees there, and then various offices and seminar rooms in this sort of geometric shift to the side. This is the cantilevering conference room, also dividable in the middle, with one wide, flat, horizontal window, one narrow, vertical window. Here again, with a very low budget, we use things like terrazzo floor tiles wrapped up the wall to give it a sort of a dignity, and simply by once leaving out the floor, a sort of a decent scale, and by painting on the name of the institution, Dietze, it also becomes a sign. You've seen that. And to end this sort of rather zigzag cross-section through what we're working on at the moment, this is a job which we might get. We've been working on planning studies here for the last year in The Hague, in Holland. I think here one must maybe talk about the sort of processes of working. In Holland, the planning system is absolutely extraordinary. I think every other country should look at Holland and take a lead from it. Something quite magical happens. The planners plan, which is not as to be expected as one might think. Mostly, in most countries, planners restrict planning. But in Holland, planners actually have ideas and put those ideas together. They get together investors, they get together architects, and they themselves as the city authorities. They put together concepts. Sometimes they actually look for radical concepts, but also obviously workable concepts. We worked on here a workshop with ourselves and Meccano and Meyer and van Schotten, two Dutch architects, on a concept. This is for the Oxford Street of The Hague. This is Richard Meyer's town hall in The Hague, so one knows straight away where we are. We're directly opposite. This is Rem Koolhaas's Suteraan. In The Hague, they're putting all the sort of infrastructure, all the parking and the trams in one direction underground, so the street space will become available as pedestrian space. We have here, we here did a workshop where the architects produced images, the investors, and also the future users, the 5 biggest department stores in Holland, were all on the table, all saying that works, that doesn't work. And so in the end, we, after having intensely worked together, sort of day and it was always for 2 days. We sort of worked and had dinner and then worked later in the evening. We developed a master plan for the whole district, and this hopefully will now go to the stage of realization. If it does, the part that we will be working on is this block opposite Richard Meyer. We also have 2 housing towers, C&A, a big shopping centre. We're now talking about a cinema centre here, which I think was a missing function at the stage of the workshops. These drawings are not designs; they're simply sketches of of functional constellations. At one point, we did precise computer drawing of towers and shops. At one point, one sketches the massing of a much lower, much more solid block. I think I just want to stop there. Just cut. These projects one can't draw to a conclusion because one continually works on them until they're cast out in the world. Thank you.